Tav Chof Beis Amud Aleph, the top of the Yoma, the beginning of the parak. Zok the Mishnah B'Rishaina initially Kol Misharoitza Litrei Mesamizbeach Tayr. So we discussed earlier in the previous parak about the Trumas Adeshen. Now the Mishnah and in the Gemara that follows will discuss the way of allocating which Kahanim do which Avodah. And it started off in the day, the first that started in the day, that was the Trumas Adeshen, the removing the ash from the Mizbeach. How do we allocate it? How do we know which Kayan does the Trumas Adeshen, which Kayan does, as we'll see as we go through the parak, which Kayan is entitled to do the shlit, which one, etc., the different avodas, the bringing of the Evorim to the Mizbeach. So they did it, initially the Trumas Hadeshen was done differently than the other avodas. As we'll see, initially, although the other avodas were all done through a goyrel, the Trumas Hadeshen was done through a race. It was done through a foot race. Whoever would win the race would be entitled to do the Trumas Hadeshen. So therefore, the Mishnah says, B'Rishaina, at first, Kol Misharoisa Litra Mesamizbeach Tayr. Whoever wanted to do the Trumas Mizbeach could be Tayr, meaning either the pshat is that if there was only one person who wanted to do it, it was given to him, or as the Meir explains, it was given to the Kayan that came first. So if there was not a high demand, as we'll see, there was not a high demand to do the Trumas Hadeshen, and there would be times when when it was time to do the Trumas Hadeshen, there was only one Kayan present, or when it was clear that this Kayan came first before the other one, he was entitled to do it. Then he's Tayrim. Ubisman shein marubim, but if there were many Kahanim that wanted to do it, or they came at the same time, then they would determine it by way of a race. They would run up the ramp, the kevish to Mizbeach, and kol hakadolim chaver bar b'hamois zocha. Whoever would come first within the first 4 amos, we'll see in the Gemara which 4 amos we're talking about. Whoever would win the race, zocha, it would be zocha. If there was a tie, if they were both equal, then then the one in charge, the administrator, would say Hatzbiyu, put out your finger. Now they would do a girl. And as we'll see in the Gemara, this is the type of girl that they did 4 times during the day. They did it at different intervals to determine which Kayan did the various avodas. So in this case, when there was a tie, they used a girl like the other allocations, which were also based on a garl. So he said, Hatzbiyu, put out a finger. They could put out 1 finger or 2 fingers, but they would not put out a thumb. We'll see in the Gemara why they didn't do a thumb. So just generally speaking, we'll see more details in the Gemara. The way they did it was they started from 1 Kayan. They took out the hat of 1 Kayan. The Mamuna would throw out a number, a random number, which was more than the Kahanim that were there. He would throw out a random number, and they would start counting the fingers, and where the number would end, the finger that number would end on, that kind would be Zeichen. But they didn't put out a thumb, as we'll see why in the Gemara. It happened, there was a Maisa that when they had the race, and they were running up the ramp, the Kevesh, and the 2 Kahanim were even, and they were running, and they were running together, and they were running evenly, and they were running up the Kevesh, and 1 Kayan pushed his friend, so he fell, and his leg was broken. Bezin saw the Bezin, saw that there was trying to be a danger over here. They were masakin that they would no longer have the races, and they would be masakin it only with a pious. A pious is a girl. The Meiri says it's a lotion from pious pius, the one that was determined on a girl, and that's mafias. It appeased the people that it was done in a way that there was no favoritism. So they stopped doing the running, the races, and they did it with a pious. The Tais Rishonim explains that even though it's also to run doing the avodah, but this was not considered part of the avodah, so the race it was proper, and it was done initially, but since it came to the Sakana, they stopped doing it. Arba payasas hayusham. There were 4 the girls that they had every day in the Beis Hamikdash. V'zeh payas harishon. And this was the first girl. Zakti Gemara, v'hamikara, my time out loita kinu l'rabbanan payas. Why was the Trumas Hadeshin? Why was it unique? Why was it done initially based on a race and not a gairol, not a payas like the other avodas? When answers me, Kara Savo, initially they thought came with avodas lailahu, since the Trumas Hadeshin is done at nighttime, as opposed to the main body, the avodas, which are done during the daytime, the shlit, the zrika, etc. This is done at the nighttime, so they assumed it would not be considered important by the Khan. Also, and they would not come, and they would not have a machlekes. It would not be in such high demand that it would be necessary to do a goral. But came in the house of the Kahasa. But once they saw that they did come, and it was in demand, also the sakana, and furthermore it came the sakana takinu la payasa. They were saking a girl as well. The burning of the limbs and the fats on the mizbeach. That's an avodah that is done at nighttime. That can be burnt on the mizbeach at nighttime. And nevertheless, the rabbanon were masakin a garala payas for that. So what's the difference between that and the Trumas Hadeshin? The Gemara answers, safe avodah the imami. No, it's not an avodas laila. It's the conclusion of the avodas yom. The ikar avodah, the main body of the avodah, is during the daytime. And this is the conclusion of it is burning the Varma Pedarim after the whole avodah was done. The shchita, the zrika, the kabbalah, the zri, the halacha, the zrika. This is the conclusion of it, and it can be done at night, but it's considered a choshev, a safe avodah d'yamamo, and therefore there was in high demand. Well, the Trumas Hadeshin can be viewed in the same way. It's the beginning of the daytime avodah. You start off by doing the Trumas Hadeshin. The Omar Rabbi Yochanan says, Kiddush Yadav the Trumas Hadeshin, if a person, a kohen, washes his hands and feet. Before doing the avodah, the kohen has to wash his hands and feet from the water from the kir. Now, if a person does that, if he's Mekadosh Yadav the Trumas Hadeshin, Lamachar Ein Tzorach Lekadosh, and he doesn't have to the next day do it again. Shekfar Kiddush Mitchilas Avodah, because he already did it from the beginning of the avodah. Meaning as follows, the Rashi explains. A person, a kohen, if he's Mekadosh Yadav from the waters of the kir, Kiddush Yadav Raglov, as long as he doesn't have a Hesach Hadas, or he doesn't leave the Zorah, he doesn't have to do it anymore. He can continue doing the avodah based on the initial kiddush that he did. A kohen cannot do the avodah without the kiddush, but if he does the kiddush, if he does the washing of his hands and feet, as long as he doesn't have this hes chadas, he can continue doing the avodah. He does not have to wash between every avodah. The rabbanon were geyser that, however, the next day, even if he's there throughout the day, the next day he does, because there is a psul of lina of the Varm Pedarim. If they was left over to the next day, things that were left over to the next day have a psul of lina. The Rabbanim imposed this, so to speak, lina on the Kiddush Yadayim Ralayim, and they said that the next day, mid Rabbanan, even if there was no Hesach Hadas, he has to be Mekadosh Yadav Raglav. However, Rabbi Yochanan said, if he did the Kiddush Yadav for the Trumas Hadeshin, even though it's at nighttime, but comes the Aloisa Shachar, comes the daybreak, he does not have to do Kiddush Yadayim Raglaim. The Rabbanan did not require in this case, because he's already Mekadosh his hands for the beginning of the next day's avodah, so people will view it as not lina. They won't view it in the same context as lina. That will view it as he was ready, he was Mekadosh his hands for the next day's avodah. So you see that the Trumas Hadeshin is the beginning of the next day's avodah. Where it says, Ema shekfar kiddush mitchila la'avodah. It doesn't mean it's kiddush for the tchilas avodah, but tchila la'avodah, for an avodah. So therefore, that's why he does it. But it's not really, the Trumas Hadeshin, according to this teretz, is not considered to be the beginning of the day of the daytime avodah. So what's the pshat, and why did the Rabbanan not impose the the chiyuv of washing again and during their day break. So why wouldn't they mechayiv you to do it again after Alaysa Shachar? According to this pshat, is because it was in close proximity to Alaysa Shachar, therefore people won't assume that there was lina. So therefore, we're making a chilek at this point of the Gemara. We're making this chilek between the Trumas Hadeshen, which is a nighttime avodah, and between the Varm Padorim, the burning of the Varm, which is Seif the Yamama, which is the end of the daytime. Ikadamra, different teretz, however, Mikar Savur, the different teretz. Why did the Rabbanan not impose, not institute rather a goyrel at the beginning for the Trumas Hadeshen, a different mahal? Because Keva the Kainashina, they figured that why people will not come for a different reason. Because it's hard to get up in the morning. There's Ainashina Loyasu, they assume people, the Kohen, will not come. That it won't be in high demand. But came the Chazada also, but when they saw that it wasn't, they did come. Furthermore, they came to a sakana during the race, takinu l'rabbanan payasa. They are misakin a payas agora. Well, over there also, the varm pedorim, the burning of the apartment, is not at nighttime, and sometimes, as the Tzedek Visham says, it's done late at night. And Taisus explains it's done at night, and if it's done at night, then the kohen who does it has to be there the entire night to make sure that if it falls off, if it bursts and is propelled off the Mizbeach, he has to put it back on the Mizbeach. So over there, by Ravar P'dam, the Ika Inashina, there is an item of Til Rabbana Payas, and nevertheless are Masakin Payas. Yes, but it's different. Getting up earlier is harder than staying up late. So therefore, they staying up late, even though there's Shina and it, people are tired, the Khanim are tired, but there they assumed there would be an high demand. The Khanim would come, but to get up so early in the morning, then they were assumed that they would not come, and therefore initially they were not Masakin at Payas. Is the reason for, as was stated, that's the reason that they made it takana for the goyrel. We have a different reason for it, for the takana of a goyrel. The sign we learned in the Brayso, Misha Zocha b'Trumas Hadeshen, whoever was Zeicha for the Trumas Hadeshen, Zocha b'Sira Marocha b'Sira Shnei Gzir. So what came together with the right to do the Trumas Hadeshen was also the arranging the wood on the Mizbeach to be burnt, and with Shnei Gzireis and 2 blocks of wood. They had the 2 logs of 2 blocks of wood that were burned on the Mizbeach. So therefore, you're telling me that the girl was because of the kind of the foot raise. We see that we needed the girl because the Trumas Hadeshen was in high demand, but because what came with it was not only a Trumas Hadeshen, was also arranging the Mizbeach and the Shnei Gzireis. Amar Ravashi answered, there are 2 stages of the Takan. Initially they thought, also that Kohen will not come for the Trumas Hadeshen. Meaning initially the Trumas Hadeshen was only for the Trumas Hadeshen and did not have these other privileges associated with it. So initially they thought they would not be in high demand. They don't need a girl. But came in the Chazada also, they saw that they did come, also namely they sakana, and not only that, it was in such high demand that they came to the sakana during the raise, takina l'payasa. They were misaken a girl payas. But came to the second l'payasa, once they were misaken a payas, they also then didn't come anymore. Meaning initially they came, they figured that, well, there's no girl. Yes, they're getting up early, but there's a race, and they can exert themselves and try, and they were confident that they would win the race, and therefore they would be zoicha for it. But when they saw there was a girl, it's not in their hands, and the chances are that they're not going to be zoicha, they didn't come up early and get up early and come on the chance that they might be zoicha, but the likelihood is that they won't be. Also, who says that, well, it will fall on us? Who says that we'll win the girl? So therefore, they didn't come. Then, to entice them to come, they were masakin, gzire etzem ki hechad enesu nepai. So they gave these extra privileges so to entice the Kohen to come, and they would come and join the girl, because yes, even though the chances are that they would not win, but the reward was greater. So the Mishnah said it was manshehim merubim. Then when they were many and there was a demand, then what they did was, then they had a race. And whoever would win in the 4 amas, then he would win. So how did we find the 4 amas of this race that they initially had? Amar Papa Pshitali, Arba amas, the Ara loy. It's not the 4 amas closest to the ground. It's not the 4 amas because it's Ratzon Oilam Kevish Tanan. It says they ran up the Kevish, so it's not the 4 amas before leading up to the Kevish. Because it says Ratzon Oilam Kevish. Kamaisin Namilo, it doesn't refer also to the first amas of the Kevish itself, meaning it doesn't refer to the beginning of the Kevish and 4 amas up, because Ratzon Oilam Kevish Tanan, it says they ran up the ramp. And whoever, he said, they ran up the amas, they ran up the kevish rather, they ran up the ramp, and whoever preceded his friend within 4 amas. So therefore, it's not the first amas. They ran up the ramp, and then there was an area of 4 amas, a defined area of 4 amas, whoever came first to that area. So it's not the beginning of the ramp. The Beni Namila, it's not the middle of the ramp, because Lo Mesayim Melsa, because there's no clear demarcation of where that ends, where the finish line is. So Pshitali, the government's Be'ach Tanan. So it must mean that the 4 amas means the 4 amas before the Mizbeach, the Kevish. You come up to the Mizbeach, it must mean the part of the Kevish that was in with 4 amas of the Mizbeach. So it's the kevish that is up the ramp, and the end of it, which is within 4 amas from the mizbeach, from the top of it, which is 4 amas from the mizbeach, that is where that 4 amas is where the finish line is. So, but what's the shala by Rav Papa? Arba amas she'amra bahare ami yasayid v'ami yasayvav. Does that include the yasayid and the sayvav? Oidilma bar me'ami yasayid v'ami yasayvav. Or does it exclude a teku? Now the base of the mizbeach was wider on the bottom. It had the amma of foundation around it. Then it went up and narrowed. There was a sayviv, and then it went up and narrowed. When we say the 4 amas leading up to the mizbeach, the finish line is 4 amas within the mizbeach. Do we mean the very top of the mizbeach, or from what would be the base of the mizbeach? What area do we find the 4 amas that come before the mizbeach? The top of the kevish, that is 4 amas within 4 amas of the mizbeach. Is that the top part of the mizbeach, the narrow part of the mizbeach, or the very widest part of the mizbeach at the base, or the more middle part of the mizbeach, which is not the widest? It narrows after the yesod, but it's still wider, and before it narrows after the sovev, which is what goes around the mizbeach, where it surrounds the mizbeach, that amma that surrounds the mid part of the mizbeach, teku.